being placed on YouTube, today's briefing. We do have a briefing that will be followed by 4 bills that we will take up at the conclusion of the hearing. The hearing today is on the overview of enforcement activities from the Department of the Environment, particularly as it pertains to protecting public health and the environment. This comes in light of a number of issues that have been raised over the last 4 or 5 months, namely the spillage in Southern Maryland and the sickness of 20 people from eating oysters, from the Valley Protein having their license suspended for a couple of days because they're out of compliance, with concerns about drinking water permits, as well as the number of inspections in terms of CAFOs, which are basically chicken growers. We have today with us the Secretary of the Environment, and I think he has some supporters and backup to answer questions and possibly present with him. And we will, in a moment, begin with Secretary Grumbles. Secretary Grumbles will be followed by the Attorney General for the state of Maryland, Mr. Brian Frosch. And then they will be followed by Eric Schaefer from the Environmental Integrity Project that issued a report in the last couple of months on some of these issues. At that point, I'm sure committee members will have questions. We will have extensive time for those questions, but I'd like us to take the testimony from the 3 witnesses, and maybe more. The Secretary might call on other people from his staff as well to assist him. And then we'll take questions on all the topics as well. And rather than having cross dialogue between our people testifying, I believe the questions that will follow the testimony will give everyone an opportunity to respond to concerns that have been raised. So with that, let us welcome for the first time this session, Secretary Ben Grumbles, to enlighten the committee and the public. Thank you for joining us, Secretary Grumbles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much. It's always an honor to appear before the committee. I want to focus on the progress we're making and also speak directly to the concerns that you and others have raised about some recent missteps and some challenging enforcement and regulatory matters that we're very focused on. I will summarize the last year and looking forward by saying it's been a very challenging year, and our priorities remain to focus on the pandemic and the environmental health aspects of COVID-19, the climate crisis, and developing comprehensive and durable sustainable solutions, and also the Chesapeake Bay and the environmental health throughout for all Marylanders in the state and throughout the region. On the COVID front, I just wanted to emphasize, because I think people lose sight of it, that this requires all state agencies to be engaged and involved, and MDE has focused not only on making sure that environmental responsibilities and requirements are met, and that including as much as possible during the shutdown, but also in the recovery efforts. We're one of the states that has been leading the charge on biomonitoring, helping to save lives by testing wastewater in congregate settings like public housing, the Housing Department of Baltimore City, and campuses and prisons, other types of congregate settings. It's an innovative approach. Governor and the Department of Health and local entities have provided full support on that front. And it's a wave of the future by using our technologies to test for viruses and other types of pathogens in wastewater to get an early jump start on potential outbreaks or hot buildings. We're proud of that. We continue to follow that closely. On the climate crisis, as you know, Mr. Chairman, our department and other departments and counties and private sector entities, we're all focused on meeting our climate ambition. I would say over the last year, we've made real progress in issuing responsible regulations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have not only put in place and are following through on the ban on hydrofluorocarbons, super polluting greenhouse gas. We are one of the leading states to start that effort, but we also are following closely on proposing regulations for methane emissions. We know we have a lot of work to do on that front, including from landfills. And as you know, we developed a very extensive, detailed plan to get to 50% greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. That is an economy-wide approach. We are working with others, and we look forward to working with the legislature on the legislative components of that. On October 1, the governor issued a letter to the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House saying 4 environmental priorities for the administration this session are, one of them is comprehensive finance legislation to help to pay for not only today, but tomorrow with the Chesapeake Bay and conservation financing innovation. And we're hopeful working together, we can get that done this session with you and with the House. We also have, as according to the governor's priorities, a focus on clean and renewable energy standards and putting into legislation those components of the comprehensive 2030 greenhouse gas reduction goal. We know there's an important discussion on exactly how to get to aggressive goals, but we're proud of the fact that we've developed detailed concrete plans, and we look forward to working with the legislature on making those a reality. The other one is open space and access, recreational access. It's such an important component of our green infrastructure strategies. And the fourth one, which ties in climate and Chesapeake Bay and a clean environment, is providing for a just and equitable transition as we move to the clean energy economy. Now, I wanted to emphasize that our work always recognizes the important role of proactive regulation and enforcement. And so over the last year, we have recognized, particularly with COVID, but over the last few years, we have been keeping track of penalties and referrals. And we know that that's an area where we need to continue to step up. And we are doing so. We have working with the Attorney General, secured important settlement agreements, consent decrees over the last year. And we are actively working right now on a very important priority enforcement case involving Baltimore City, the Back River wastewater treatment plant and the Patapsco treatment plant. These are top priorities for us. The state and the federal government have put so much money into those efforts, those important investments. We need to help ensure that the Department of Public Works optimizes their workforce, fills vacancies, meets the needs, complies with the permits. This is an area where it is a top priority for us because it is integral to ensuring our continued leadership on Chesapeake Bay restoration and meeting the Phase 3 WIP requirements of the TMDL for the Chesapeake Bay. That's a very important component. The work in ensuring that EPA steps in, as the Attorney General knows, the Hogan administration is very focused in working with other states and the new administration, the Biden administration, to ensure that we not only hold ourselves accountable, but that there's a fair share and that the EPA as the interstate umpire in the lawsuit we have against EPA comes up with a real solution to closing the gap, not just the $324 million a year gap in Pennsylvania's Chesapeake Bay restoration plan, but also uses the regulatory backstop authorities, which we fully support. So that's a very important component. The other point I wanted to emphasize in my time with members of the committee is that we have a real focus on using the new tools and also increasing the workforce to help oversee compliance matters, compliance issues. There are two components of that I want to emphasize. One is with respect to the Valley Proteins case. On this situation, we have an administratively continued permit for that meat processing facility on the Eastern Shore. It is inexcusable that it has taken this long to renew that permit. Every state in the nation has administratively continued permits. The EPA works with the states on those fronts. We keep close track, and we are committed to reducing the number of administratively continued permits. Our environmental justice policy that we put in place at the very beginning of 2021 recognizes that as permits come up for renewal, and as we are focusing on the large amounts of new federal funding coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law, that we look at communities that are overburdened or underserved and put a priority on those. So we're looking very closely at using a lens, an environmental justice screening tool, so that when permits come up for renewal, we are looking at the potential change in the context over the years as they've continued to operate under expired permits. And we're putting a priority on renewing those permits as well, with a focus on those where there's a greatest risk to public health and the environment. We recognize that technology can help us on that front, but it also requires manpower and woman power and bringing in more people with expertise when we can. Now, I want to mention two specific things besides on the Valley Proteins permit issue. I have made it very clear over the last year and a half that facility needed to dramatically improve its level of wastewater treatment. It's a complicated site. It has surface water and groundwater challenges. We came up with the idea of helping to ensure that they put in place ENR, enhanced nutrient removal, world-class technologies that cities have put in place with significant funding. We made the decision to help fund some of that. I concluded that probably, even though the law didn't require it be cost shared, that it should be cost shared. When my staff and I put together the pieces of how not only did they have previous violations, but ongoing violations, that's when we pulled away the funding. And I know the legislature supported that pulling away of funding of that facility. Now, I want to ensure members that we are very focused, first and foremost, on the enforcement action that we are taking against Valley Proteins. We are also focused on modernizing the permit to significantly increase the environmental safeguards. But this is one where I agree that important work is needed to address that, and we are absolutely willingly and wanting to work with the NGOs and the citizens in the area to make sure that situation is corrected and that strong enforcement action is completed. And then the last one I really want to focus in on, particularly because, the last two I want to mention, since both the Attorney General and my friend Eric Schaefer from EIP are appearing before you on a matter involving vacancies within the department, our water supply program. On December 9th, I wrote to the Attorney General to lay out our situation and how we were very focused on filling vacancies. This was prompted in part by the Attorney General's letter and press release raising concerns, which I would say are always legitimate concerns, wanting to make sure a regulatory agency has the expertise and has the workforce in position to meet current and new challenges. What I also wanted to emphasize and do in the December 9 letter to the Attorney General is that our department worked with EPA. It was not just an EPA commissioned report that CADMAS did. We acknowledged, okay, we need an assessment. How are other states, how many employees are needed for our source water protection programs, our Safe Drinking Water Act programs. So we have been engaging with them, working closely with EPA. And also we did submit a phased resource implementation plan to make sure that the vacancies would be filled. And I want to assure members today that one of the highest priorities I have and Water and Science Administration Director Lee Curry has is working to fill those vacancies. And we're making real progress. We have filled a significant number of those vacancies, and we will continue to do so. And I don't think it's fair, and it doesn't give a complete picture if people are led to believe we have vacancies and we're putting health at risk. This whole effort was not about the quality of the water. It was about the manpower, the forces in place to protect our precious surface water and drinking and groundwater that constitute our drinking water supply. And we're on top of that. And I'm feeling that we're making real progress, and we have full support from the governor's budget folks to make sure that we have the tools needed. The last one, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your accommodation, is on the CAFO front, animal feeding operations. We read the report that the Environmental Integrity Project issued. We thoroughly reviewed it. We also did our own independent analysis. This report concluding that we're not bringing appropriate enforcement to the table. We're not properly inspecting the 500 or more facilities, animal feeding operations, poultry feeding operations in Maryland. And I will tell you this, we continue to have a program that is one of the stronger programs in the nation. We work closely with the EPA on our animal feeding operation permitting program. We issued the most recent permit 2 years ago. It included important new safeguards and requirements and accountability provisions. We believe we can do more. One of the aspects of the animal feeding operation program, which was brought up by EIP, is that the permits aren't comprehensive enough. We are working on policy to ensure that when we inspect the site and in working with the technical services provider who reviews the best management plans, the comprehensive nutrient management plans, that they are looking at resource concerns. Sometimes that's air emissions. It can be. And we're working with them on that front. And even more to the point, which I think with the Environmental Integrity Project report spoke to and criticized the department, we are absolutely committed to robust enforcement and compliance assistance. Now, inspections, the number of inspections, that was a key component. How often do we inspect? Well, I know members of the committee have visited animal feeding operations. They know the size of these larger facilities. They know the benefits and the challenges of this important operation. And I can tell you that MDE is committed to increasing the number of inspections, the number of on-site inspections we do. The report said that 84% of the inspections we do are the AFOs fail. I don't think that's a fair characterization. It's not a pass-fail. It's a comprehensive inspection, and we come up with areas where they need to correct violations. In most cases, they are paperwork violations, and I'm not diminishing the importance of those, but they're also important housekeeping and waste management violations. We're committed to following up on those. I'm committed to ensuring that the number of inspections we do increases by 50% over the calendar year. And part of that is also tapping into this new tool that MDE has been working with EPA on to help, and others in all other states around the country, and that is to increase the amount of remote offsite video inspections. It's not a replacement to, but it's a supplement to the on-site inspections. I think there's great opportunity for that, not just in AFOs, but in other facilities. We're pursuing that. And we know that particularly with AFOs, there are real risks to visiting a site, more than one site by a single inspector in a given day, based on biosecurity risks that the farm faces. And we want to avoid a dangerous situation like South Carolina may be experiencing now with avian flu. So we need to have more inspectors, and we're committed to that, and also to relying on these off-site video enhanced inspections as well for to help ensure that the regulated community knows that we are overseeing their compliance, and that we will continue to step in as we have done, and as we have brought penalties when we need to, particularly with significant non-compliance where there might be a risk to public health and the environment. Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude. I thank you for your patience and indulgence, and congratulate the Attorney General for his many years of public service and his last year focusing, as always, on environmental progress, and his staff working closely with MDE for air, water, land, waste, making continued real progress for those things that matter to Marylanders. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We're going to hold questions till we hear from all three speakers. Let's now go to the Attorney General for the state of Maryland, Mr. Brian Frosch. Welcome, Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, friends. First, I have to apologize. My lighting tech is the sun, and it's in and out of the clouds, so you may see me brightly illuminated, or you might not see me at all. I just don't know. I appreciate having this opportunity to speak to you. I have a PowerPoint that I'd like to present, and if I may, I'll share my screen, or if the staff would like to run it, that's fine too. Can I?
Lamori, who's got control of the screen?
I do, Senator Chabinsky. I'm sharing it right now.
Okay, great.
Let me say by way of introduction, we did write to the Secretary last month and expressed deep concern with the state of our drinking water systems in Maryland. And I think it's a critical but not unique problem in the Department of Environment. I think if you look at the department's budget from 2015 to today, what you will see is that the number of full-time employees, FTEs, has dropped significantly. Worse than that, there are many unfilled positions. So not only have the number of positions available in the department, not only have they been diminished, but also the number of filled positions has been diminished even further. And I think you'll see that across the agency, and it's particularly acute in the water supply system program. So if you could move to the next slide, please. The water supply program at MDE's mission is to ensure the safety of 3,300 public drinking water systems. Those drinking water systems supply the water for the vast majority of Marylanders. There are some who are on wells, some who are on other types of things, but most folks in our state are getting their water through a water supply program. The objective of that water supply program at a bare minimum is to prevent public health crises like the one that blew up in Flint, Michigan. If you could move to the next slide, please. So in 2021, or perhaps even before, the EPA commissioned a report, and Secretary Grumbles said that MDE worked closely with the consultant called Cadmus, and it issued its report in May of 2021, and it said Maryland once had a robust drinking water program and was able to go above and beyond the minimum federal requirements. But now, and this is a quote, due to declining resources, increasing demands, and the need to make cutbacks, MDE may not be able to meet the minimum requirements needed to maintain primary enforcement responsibility. And MDE's ability to meet all demands and requirements is greatly compromised. Next slide, please. So you can see on, what the Cadmus report said, that there was a severe gap between the available staffing and funding and what's necessary to run the program. They found that the program needs 187% more full-time employees, and they need 93% more money. There are right now in MDE's budget 71 full-time employee positions. However, a third of those are vacant. There were 12 that were abolished. There are vacant positions that are unfilled, and there have been hiring freezes that have afflicted MDE and other agencies of state government. But right now, almost 40% of the employees that are dedicated to Maryland's drinking water program, those positions are vacant. Next slide, please. And you can see a little bit about the decline in water supply programs, FTEs. In 2011, there were 62. In 2016, 47. 2018, 34. And that is in the face of new responsibility for 800 transient non-community water systems that was assigned to this program, 350 new water systems, new oversight of lead testing in public schools that's been assigned to this program, and contaminants that we're starting to recognize as very harmful, like PFAS and Legionella, harmful algal bloom. So this program has had additional responsibilities while its number of employees has declined. Now in 2020, it went back up to 44 FTEs, but that's primarily due to the transfer to that program of folks who were in other offices, boards, and lab certification staff. Next slide, please. According to the Cadmus report, our water supply program, our drinking water program, is underfunded by $8.1 million in annual funds. Now in Maryland, 85% of that money comes from the federal government. Only 12% comes from the state. The average nationally is 58% federal money, 42% non-federal money. In 2021, what the Cadmus report said is that we need 126 full-time employees and an annual budget of $15.7 million. And what that means is that we are 82 full-time employees short of where EPA, its consultant, recommended that we be. 82, I mean, we're 2/3 lower than what they recommend. And that's a $7.8 million gap in our funding every single year. Next slide, please. Well, this chart just shows you the history of the gap and of the funding. And if projected out into the future, right now we're 82 employees short of what we need, $7.5 million. And as you can see, as we go out into the future, those gaps will be increasing. Next slide, please. So what are the consequences of these short staffing and funding shortfalls? So MDE says that its drinking water inspectors' workload is to perform 240 sanitary surveys per cycle. And a cycle used to be 12 to 18 months. That is, you had a number of licensees that you were supposed to look at. You were supposed to get there between 12 and 18 months. That's been increased. So it's now 3 to 5 years. The national average is 67. So whether you're talking about 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, our folks have a caseload that's almost 4 times higher than the average inspector in any other state in the nation. And what that means is you can't possibly get your work done in a 3 to 5 year period, or even in 18 months. EPA, the Cadmus report cites a concern about a, quote, loss in sanitary survey quality due to the MDE's sanitary inspectors' significantly greater workload than the national average. And if you look at what it takes to do one of these inspections, they have to go look at the source of the water. They have to test the source. They have to go to the water treatment plants to see whether they're doing their job. They have to look at the storage and distribution systems. They have to look at water quality test results. They have to look at operating and maintenance procedures. So you can't do one of these inspections in a day for most sanitary, for most drinking water systems. It can't be done in a day. Some of them, it takes weeks or even months, but very few of them can get done in one day. So when you're thinking about 240 surveys for each inspector, it would take far beyond the 3 to 5 years to do that are supposedly our cycle now. It would take much longer than that for the folks to get their jobs done. And the sanitary surveys are only one part of the MDE inspectors' jobs. Next slide, please. The other thing that's going on simultaneously to our failure to adequately monitor the drinking water system throughout our state is that there has been a decline in the number of operators of these systems who are certified. You have to go through training. You have to gain some experience, and these are not simple jobs, but you have to have certified operators to know that the drinking water systems are operating properly. Next slide, please. In Maryland, almost more than a quarter of our systems do not have certified operators. Now, in 2015, they were 84% of them did. Today, it's down to 72%. And EPA said that 1/4 of the state systems are operating in violation of state and federal requirements. That's right now, 1/4 are operating in violation of the law. Next slide, please. So Cadmus EPA said that MDE must develop a resource investment plan to include establishing a lower public water system ratio to field staff ratio for EPA and approval by October 21st. I want to point out 2 things. In Secretary Grumbles' letter and in his statement to you, you did not hear 2 things. You did not hear how many people there are, how many of the 71 slots there are in the water supply program are actually filled today. How many employees we have. He said that there was they've filled a significant number of vacancies. Well, they were at 44. Where are they today? Be interesting to know. The other thing is that the department's response to the Cadmus report was due at the beginning of October last year. Where is it? I think that's the end of my slides. Yeah, that's the end of my slides. Look, let me just say in summary, this is probably the most critical function that the State Department of Environment performs. We all, at least 5.5 million of us, depend upon clean drinking water for our health, for our kids' health. And we've seen what happens in cities like Flint, Michigan, when people are asleep at the wheel. We cannot afford to have people who are not certified operators running these systems. We cannot afford to let the systems go for years at a time without inspections. And we certainly can't afford to have cursory inspections being done on these absolutely critical infrastructure items. So, the Secretary and I have worked together well for 7 years. We have a sharp disagreement about this particular issue. Disagreements about philosophy in general, but I think this one is an extremely serious situation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you. Now we're going to move to Eric Schaefer with Environment Integrity Project. They published a report some maybe 8 or 10 weeks ago. I could be off a little bit, dealing with a number of issues, but focused on CAFOs, chicken growing operations and farms. I would point out, while I have not fully memorized the report, I looked for responses to the report. And to date, I have not seen one from the Department of Environment contesting what was in the report. I do know what was formerly the DPI, the Delmarva Poultry, they have a new name now, did respond with some minor to moderate disagreements, which are available to you, but I never saw a document from the department contesting what was in that report. So with that, Mr. Schaefer, you're up. You need to unmute, Eric. Mr. Schaefer, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. Can't believe I did that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for inviting me to testify and talk about our report, which aimed to draw attention to the lack of enforcement of the rules that are supposed to keep pollution from poultry operations, and that primarily comes from the manure these operations generate, out of our waters on the Eastern Shore and out of the Chesapeake Bay. Just for context, we've got something over 500 operators in the state with an annual production of about 300 million birds a year. That number hasn't changed much, but the market weight of the birds has gone up considerably, 20 to 25% higher than we saw maybe 8-9 years ago. 90% of that production is on the Eastern Shore. It probably doesn't surprise anybody. The industry generates about 300,000 tons of poultry litter a year. Most of that ends up getting spread on croplands on the Eastern Shore. And of course, the manure can be very useful as fertilizer, but it's packed with very high levels of phosphorus. If it's overapplied or applied in the wrong places, it gets in the water and causes algae blooms, takes oxygen out of waterways that fish need to survive. So keeping this runoff out of our waters is very important. To avoid this problem, Maryland for a number of years has required these operators to comply with Clean Water Act permits, which include certain management practices and require that poultry operators, those that spread the waste on their own fields, comply rather with nutrient management plans that are supposed to balance the amount of manure you put on the field with the capacity of the area of the crops in the surrounding area to take it, to hold it and keep it from running off. So if we can go to slide 3, which I think provides some of our conclusions. Slide 3. I just want to, I appreciated Mr. Grumbles' thoughtful remarks, and I just want to say to the committee that we gave our data to the department about 6 weeks before we released our report. You'll see a question and answer back and forth with MDE and the Department of Agriculture in the report. There wasn't a lot of dispute about the data itself. I understand people may draw different conclusions, but we did share this information as we try to do when we are critiquing state programs. I guess before looking at the numbers and looking at the lack of enforcement, I'll just ask you to consider this. If I drive with an expired license or with a car registration that's expired, I can be fined up to $500. If I keep doing it, I can lose my license. So what we're really asking here when we look at the enforcement question is, should the poultry industry in the state of Maryland be held to at least that level of accountability if they fail to follow the requirements of their nutrient management plans and risk putting a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen into waterways that already have too much? So to illustrate, 84% of poultry operations did not meet one or more requirements. I think Mr. Grumbles said it's unfair to say it's failure, it's not a pass-fail system. I will concede that. I think what we found is that at 84% of these facilities, the operators were not meeting one, usually several requirements. 43% failed a follow-up inspection, 4% were penalized by the state. Only 4 operators of the 182 inspections, 182 facilities inspected between 2017 and 2019, between 2017 and 2020, paid any penalty at all. Only 4 operators out of the 182, regardless of the 182 inspected, regardless of the violations. If I can maybe go to the next slide. We expected to hear that these were all paperwork requirements. The slide before that, please. I'm sorry, it's going to be there. That's it. So of these 182 operations, 104 actually violated waste management requirements. So for example, you have 66 facilities that were cited for inadequate waste storage structures, 48 improper use or maintenance of dead bird composting, some with inadequate buffers, some with poor stormwater management. You have to understand, for a program like this, first of all, these are waste management requirements that have an impact, but we don't have pipes that lead out of poultry operations that are monitored constantly for runoff or discharge. This is the program. Finding this kind of problem is a big part of the program, because you're not going to be there where you can actually see runoff go down a ditch or a sluice. That's very unusual that you'd actually be present for that. It's these practices that lead to that problem. If I can see the next slide. Before leaving this issue, we found 57 facilities where we could get information about the amount of phosphorus or nitrogen in poultry manure that were applied to croplands. 57 facilities. Those are poultry operations that spread poultry litter on their own land. 29 of those 57 violated their nutrient management plans. That is, they applied phosphorus or nitrogen or both in amounts above what their own nutrient management plans were supposed to limit them to. So again, you overload fields, you're going to get runoff. That's the presumption behind these programs, and more than half of them had that problem. As you'll see here, the inspections are declining. We understand COVID pinched the ability of inspectors to get out on the fields, but that decline started happening before COVID shut everything in. We might have to confirm this later, but I think it's about 2/3 of the CAFOs, 2/3 of these poultry operators don't see an inspector inside 5 years. I could be wrong about that, but if you think 182 in the several year period we were looking at, and more than 500 overall, a lot of these farms just aren't seeing any inspections. So I want to point out a couple of loopholes in the law that we are concerned about and flagged in our report. Most poultry litter is shipped off site and spread by other farmers. We don't have information about where that's being applied and what amounts, that at least that's available to the public. So we don't know whether the fields that are taking poultry litter, taking most of the poultry litter, are over applying it or applying it in places where you shouldn't put down any poultry litter at all because the area is already saturated with phosphorus. That's a loophole that we hope the state will close. We pointed that out before.
Mr. Schaefer, you got about 1 more minute.
Okay, let's just jump to then slide 9, the very last one in the series. None of this would matter if the waters on the Eastern Shore were healthy. They're not. We just want to make the point here that using benchmarks set up by the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, you'll see that levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, summer algae, spring algae are well above the benchmarks that are supposed to indicate healthy waters. We've not seen really any improvement in phosphorus loads in these waterways since 2003. We were just able to go back that far to get the monitoring data, nor have we seen any improvement in summer algae. So if these programs were working as intended, we ought to start seeing that showing up in the monitoring results, and we aren't. So I leave you with that and the hope that we can do a little better to hold this industry accountable than we have in the past.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go to opening up to the committee for questions. I know the Attorney General has another briefing or hearing in another committee in 15 or 30 minutes. So let's start with Vice Chair Kagan, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your excellent piece in today's Baltimore Sun. If there's anyone in the room or watching online, you should definitely check it out, talking about these issues. Mr. Secretary, thank you, and Mr. Attorney General, thank you, Mr. Schaefer, thank you for this enlightening hearing. I distilled this into 4 areas, and then Secretary Grumbles, you added a 5th one to the list, and then I'm just going to run through those, and then I've got a couple of questions. So I think the problems are insufficient staffing, unrealistic workload for the inspectors, insufficient funding, and lack of enforcement. The 5th issue that you raised for me is these video inspections. So I know that my colleagues have a bunch of questions too, and I may or may not, depending on your answer, ask a question of Mr. Schaefer. But Mr. Secretary, first question, what are you doing to fill these vacancies? If everyone acknowledges, if that's one thing that everyone understands, is these folks have unrealistic expectations compared to other states, they're working too hard and there are not enough of them. what specifically are you doing to address the shortage in full-time employees? That's quite
Right. And I don't have sharp differences with the Attorney General on the importance of the drinking water program and the need to fill vacancies. What we have been working on and what we were in the process of successfully completing is filling those vacancies. We have 68 positions filled. Our assessment is we need to get to 102. So we have another beyond 68 to get to 102. So we have less than 40 to fill. We also are working, we have 30 more that we need to fill. We are also working to meet the needs of certified operators.
right.
And so that's working with our board of wastewater operators to improve the process for and streamlining for operator certification. The other question that was raised is where's the resource investment plan, the strategy? As I laid out in the letter, and I want to make clear right now, we agree that a plan was necessary. We submitted to EPA the phase 1 of it. We are working with EPA on the phase 2 portion of the resource investment plan. And I'm happy to share with the committee what we've submitted to EPA and then ask EPA, what's appropriate in terms of that. But we are very focused on filling vacancies and making sure that our water continues to be safe.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think very committed, absolutely committed is great and very committed and obviously you're making progress. But I just want one other question,
Right.
if I could, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Secretary Grumbles talked for the first time that I've heard or read about video inspections, which is a little bit terrifying, actually, rather than reassuring that you'll hit the numbers. It actually raises more problems and more doubts. So right now, people in this Zoom room can see my lovely, awards and numbers and all that behind me. But what if all around me, behind me, is a hot mess? Nobody would be able to see that, and folks will show what they want to show. So I'm curious to hear how you could have any confidence, how the people could have any confidence.
Oh,
Video
yeah.
inspection would be.
Mr. Chairman, if I can spend 60 seconds on that, I am delighted to do that. And the most important thing, Senator, is it's not a replacement. It's not a substitute to on-site inspections, both scheduled and unanticipated. The videos, this predated COVID, and then it became even more important across the country with full support from EPA to help develop protocols so that videos, just like a real estate agent, sometimes will allow for a prospective purchaser to see what the inside of a house looks like. The protocols that other states are using and that we are using, we need to use it more so I can increase the presence, the touch of the regulator to regulated facilities. And the way it would work is that the operator at a facility would have a video camera and the regulator at her desk, and in places like Alaska, that means 400 miles away, but wherever in Maryland, the regulator would be telling the operator, okay, I want you to go to this piece. So I want to see if you are implementing the 9 controls that are called for in the CAFO permit, or I want to see how you're storing the manure. Nope, I want you to go, I need you to spend more time. I want the camera to focus on this and that. It's not a substitute. It's not to replace on-site inspections, but it's an important and increasingly valuable tool that we need to use more of.
Great.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Secretary.
have a lot of
Mr. Chair,
questions. We're going to
I
try
totally-
to keep it.
yeah,
to
just
one
to wrap up
question
to
each.
you,
No,
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to move on, Madam Chair. We have a lot of people. We'll come back to you.
That's fine.
One question, we have about 6 or 7 people with hands up. Let's go to Senator Gallion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you say we're getting one question each?
we'll be somewhat lax.
Okay.
I have a
couple
lot of
brief-
hands up.
Okay, thank you. My questions are, or first of all, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the folks that testified. Mr. Schaefer, I had a question. You mentioned about the litter loophole. It made it sound like, this manure is going and it wasn't really being tracked how much was being put on fields. It's my understanding, and as a farmer, I've had to do this because I've actually used chicken litter before. It has to be shown in everyone's nutrient management plans, correct? And also shown on their annual implementation reports. So wouldn't that be tracked that way and not a loophole?
If you are taking litter and applying it to fields and you're not a poultry operator yourself, then at least we aren't seeing in those annual implementation reports what you get from the poultry operators who spread litter on their own land. That is, you don't see how much is applied to what crops, when, and with that data, you can see whether or not the NMPs are being exceeded. We're not able to get that information. If you think that you're suggesting that's publicly available, and we would be glad to double back and look a little harder, but we weren't able to find it.
I don't think they won't give you the name of the individual farmer, but you could get more aggregate data, I believe, should be available. We had to double check with MDA on that. A second question, I had a chance to read the report from your group that you sent in, and then I saw the responses from Delmarva Chicken Association. I just wanted to follow up on one thing. Some of your calculations, it says were used, where you came about them using a FIV, or the fertility index value, and you were using a kind of 100, when really it says in their report that really you get up to 150 is where you want it run into issues. So is that correct?
That's correct, although I can add that we don't think using 150 would have made a significant difference. You might see a difference for one or two of the facilities, but not for the rest.
Well, that's going in line with the PMT, or the phosphorus management tool. So, and that's where that number came from. And one final quick one. You mentioned different recommendations you had. My question is, would your group support increased funding if needed for the manure transport program?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Senator Ellis. I know he's got a hearing in another committee soon. Senator Ellis, let's go to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your consideration. I really do appreciate it as we multitask. Secretary Grumbles, Attorney General for Schaefer, thank you for your testimony. I'm taking a lot of notes. There's so much to unpack, but one question, let me just get to one question really quick. Secretary Grumbles, you mentioned inspectors, inspections, that you will increase the number of inspections by 50%. So my son is a mathematician, and he tells me all the time when I hear numbers like that, be wary. I work well with you. I know you're an honorable man, but I just want a number. So is it like you double it? That'd be 100%. So if it's one inspection you have had last year, and that means you'll have 1.5 this year. If it's 2 last year, you will have like 3 next year. Do you have like real numbers to share with us with that? And I just wanted to also say that the water quality issue in that area is very important for us to really be on it, not being like Flint, because we would hate for Maryland to have what happened, Michigan to happen in Maryland, where you have no charges being filed against governor and so many folks, and Governor Snyder, who was the governor back then when this crisis started. This is a serious issue, and I see the Attorney General here, and anytime I see the Attorney General interested in the issue, I'm like always wondering what's going on, because water quality, what we drink, it affects our families and our children, and it's a serious issue throughout the state. And we don't want to see that circus happening in Maryland, what happened in Michigan. So the and the circus issue, please.
Senator, that the number that I'm looking at is somewhere between 200 and 300 inspections. 200 inspections would amount to about a 34% increase. I think we can get to 250 inspections over the course of the year. And that's by increasing the number of staff from 3 to perhaps 5 and building on partnerships and also helping to use some of the video enhanced inspection tools. But I'm really focused on significantly increasing. So somewhere between 200 and 300.
Okay, yeah, great, thanks so much. Really quick follow-up question. So
One more.
staff, thanks. A staff with, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it trouble finding people, or what's the issue in not getting the number of inspectors you need?
Right. I can say as a manager of a state agency, like other state agencies, it's sometimes difficult to find people qualified for this highly technical job. It's also sometimes hard to retain them. Because we are in the Metro DC area, there are federal agencies, and also there are a lot of environmental consulting firms that would pay a lot more.
Yeah.
But we're focused on realigning resources and increasing the number of staff for those inspections and retaining them too.
Thank you. And I hope you go into our HBCUs, which have some great students there, go into University of Maryland Eastern Shore, reaching out to these groups that have never been reached out to, especially when it comes to environmental work. That's a top priority.
UMES is helping us on our ambient air monitoring at poultry houses.
Well, I'm talking about for employees.
That.
For employees also, some great students who never given opportunities. So we need to reach out to that group also to bring those individuals in to train them. Because we have trouble finding folks, and I hear from our HBCU, historically Black university and colleges, folks that you guys never show up to recruit. Not you personally, but different agencies.
We're having a job fair in February with Bowie State, specifically on environmental employment opportunities, whether it's climate or water or air pollution.
And we need to expand that to
Thank you.
Yeah, but Eastern Shore. Thank you, and others. Thank you.
Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all our presenters. And Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to better understand a couple of the points you made in your presentation. One of them, I just want to understand about the impact of the pandemic on not only the workforce shortage, but also on possibly impacting the some of the record keeping issues with the poultry growers. Also, I'd like to understand this issue about the 126, where that number comes from, how you are looking at that 126 number. And then finally, I just would like to better understand that it seems to me that the most of the issues, the non-compliance issues that are being raised are tied to record keeping as opposed to groundwater quality concerns, and like that clarified so we can reassure the public, what's of the meaning of this and interpretation of this report.
Okay, let me go in reverse order. Actually, well, let me start with the COVID one. Actually, on COVID, I'm not. Right now, I'm not able to quantify the impact. Kaylee Lolliker, who heads up the Land and Materials Administration, may be able to provide follow-up to the committee. But I can say with beyond a doubt that while we got out the message loud and clear that there was no blanket waiver or exemption during COVID or COVID lockdowns for complying with environmental permitting or reporting responsibilities, it has an impact on operations, and it has an impact on providing reporting to the department, just as it had an impact on our field inspections, whether it was in the land program or the water program. Some of the issues raised, like in the EIP report, focused prior to COVID. So I think some of those are legitimate areas of concern, and we're following up on them. Now, on the 126, remind me, help me place the context for that. Was that in the context of inspections or employees for the water supply? Remind me, Senator.
That would be the, I believe that the feds were recommending a staffing level of 126 MDE's resource investment strategy. And that there was some
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
trying to
there
understand
is,
that number.
I think it's highly trained professionals, all honorable, come up with different, there's no objective magic number. Cadmus came up with that number. EPA and MDE were briefed on it. We don't have strong disagreements with the overall thrust of the Cadmus report, which is why we're not accepting the status quo. We viewed the number that we were focused on is 102 rather than 126. We think with partnerships, with working with the Certified Operator Board and other strategies, we can make dramatic progress. So I don't know exactly. I can't calculate or say that 126 is inviolate, that is the right number. But we got the message and we're working to meet the needs.
And finally, the non-compliance related to record keeping.
Right. And that may be one of the most important to keep in mind. And this is never an excuse or a justification to minimize any violation. But it is always important, as every regulatory agency should do, is put a priority on violations that involve releases to the environment or threaten public health. And so most of the violations are record keeping. Record keeping is important. Housekeeping is important too. Where you manage, where you put the waste, how you manage the litter. But we found that most of the violations, I'm not going to say trivial, but they were of less threatening or severe a risk, but important and worth noting and following up on.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Before I call on Senators Washington, Lamb, Patterson, and Hester, I'm going to insert myself here for a moment. There was a major sewage spillage in St. Mary's County in late October. It resulted in sickness in 20 people from eating contaminated oysters. My first question, Mr. Secretary, is why did it take approximately 2 weeks after you were notified by the local health department to have the areas of the harvesting area closed? When you were aware of the spillage, people continued to be able to harvest oysters, and it may have resulted in people being sick. So why did it take 2 weeks? I accept responsibility for a breakdown, a failure in communication. Our compliance people, our enforcement people were aware of and noted the spill, the infrastructure leakage problem. It didn't properly get communicated to the folks, the hardworking folks who run our sanitation shellfish program. And so that is a mistake that I haven't seen happen before. And Lee Curry has made sure the best we can that it never happens again, because it has consequences when people get sick or when an industry potentially gets a black eye for no good reason. It underscores the importance. So that one, it's a painful lesson and we've learned from it, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Well, first of all, thank you. And thank you for owning that. It's probably the first time from this administration I've heard someone own a problem or responsibility. So thank you for being transparent on that. Let me shift to Valley Protein for my second question. You said they were working on an administrative continued permit, a type of permit some people call zombie permits, that they live on even after they were supposedly completed or died. In the 5 years, in the last 5 years, how many inspections took place at Valley Protein during that administratively continued permits? Do you know?
I don't know. I'll ask if with Lee Curry's help, we can get you that precise number. I do know that we have been following the situation closely, and we're working to develop a modernized permit that looks at surface water, groundwater. But I don't know the answer to that question. How many inspections since 2018? I know now over the last year, we've been out there almost on a weekly basis.
It's on the same issue, Mr. Secretary. It's been reported to me that it was actually an environmental nonprofit that hired or had a drone to go over the facility, who actually came up with the evidence that they sent to you to find out that they were discharging things they shouldn't have been discharging. Is that correct?
I know that we've worked closely with the NGO, and I believe that is correct. That helped, and that also led to. I mean, we have enough humility to recognize that we're not the only eyes and ears in the field, and that's why we embrace, whether it's Blue Water Baltimore or Shore Rivers or another NGO. We gather information, and sometimes that can be information we already have, and it's corroborating. But in that case, that was helpful. That helped us move forward.
But it implies that we might have to rely on NGOs, non-governmental entities, to protect the public rather than the department. And I also understand that of the 466 permits, 198 are these zombie permits. That's almost, I don't know, 40%. I'm doing some quick math. That's a large number that may or may not have been inspected in the last 2, 5, 10, or 12 years. I mean, is that a concern to you?
We are very focused on administrative permits, the administratively continued ones, getting a fair look and reissuing or strengthening those permits. I would say that it's not an indication that we're not doing the job. It's more an indication that it needs to be a partnership. I mean, working with NGOs, working with residents or citizens, regardless of whether or not they belong to an NGO, it has always been an important additional source of information for our inspectors. That's why we have a hotline. And the point is well taken that we need to do more inspections, and we're committed to reissuing, strengthening, and reissuing permits, making sure that we don't reissue them to facilities that are not in compliance, that we get them on a enforceable order for compliance, and that if they're going to discharge under a future permit, the permit is made much stronger. And that's the whole goal of the lessons we've learned with Valley Proteins.
And my final question on this, and then I'll move on to the next senator. You know, about 15 or 20 minutes ago, you talked about Valley Protein, that you said they had previous violations, and over the last year and a half, you told them they had to clean up their operation. Yet the senators probably remember almost 1 year ago to this month or next month, there was a debate on the floor of the Senate of Maryland about giving $13 million from the Bay Restoration Fund for the first time to a private entity that you were proposing. It was a legislature that said that's outrageous. And in fact, the Budget and Tax Committee cut it to $5 million. And ultimately, because of public pressure, all of that money was taken away. So I heard a narrative a little earlier that you took the lead in realizing they shouldn't get the money, and that the legislature supported those efforts. And I think, you know, it's a bit Alice in Wonderland. It was the legislature that said, we shouldn't be giving that private money to a company that potentially could be polluting. The Budget and Tax cut the budget. There were fewer across the state, particularly from a lot of NGOs and the public. And then you had to back off, and the Hogan administration had to back off from giving taxpayer money to this company that was breaking the law.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to give you as much credit as you want for it.
No,
I just
I don't
want to
want-
lay
no.
out, I just
It's
want to lay out
legislature.
the fact. The facts are this. It is not the first time Bay Restoration Fund dollars have been provided to a private facility that was going to do important public beneficial work. I had concerns about it, and I absolutely agreed that it was a tough sell as we learned more about their failure to provide the fees that they were required to provide, and also their ongoing violations. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the legislature that also pushed very hard, and they talked with me as well about, well, why don't we cut it to 50%? And then when it came up for the opportunity where I, as the administrative official, am looking at whether or not we had a contract with them, the answer was no, we did not. And I think it was the right move to walk away from any notion of funding that important upgrade because of their ongoing violations. So I just agree. I think it's a partnership. We learned, and the General Assembly is clearly watching it, and let's focus on the future. Make sure, with the Attorney General's help, make sure that there is an enforceable consent decree over their violations. And then also make sure that if there is going to be a facility, a new entity operating at that facility, that they're operating under a much more modernized permit. And I think the NGOs know that's where MDE wants to go. And I'll be happy to keep the committee briefed on our progress on that front.
Thank you. Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Grumbles. This is a little bit of a deja vu committee. A couple of us, we just had a hearing last week where we talked to the person in charge of the health of the entire state, of our Office of Information Management. And now it seems like we have this culture, this is just a couple of reactions, this culture of the agencies talking about these issues as if it was somebody else. We haven't really had this conversation a year with you, Secretary, but I'm very concerned that while we do believe in, as a citizen legislature, we do believe in that there should be a partnership between government and its citizens. They give feedback, they provide opportunities to help us do better. But at the end of the day, when we pass laws, that it's the law enforcement entity whose responsibility it is to enforce those laws. So we continue to hear these statements that seem to suggest that you have intention, that you're making best efforts, but and maybe you accept responsibility, but it's only after getting caught, after it gets caught in the press, after 20 people get sick. So I have a couple of questions, and very specific questions, Secretary.
Okay.
And the chairman brought up the issue of zombie permits. So now I understand that there is a backlog of these zombie permits, right? And that hundreds have expired and they're being administratively carried forward, right? You've admitted that. How long will it take? Yeah, is that correct? Do you have a plan in place?
Our state, like every other state, has permits that expire at their 5-year term where the agency is working to reissue, strengthen, revise their permits. And yes, we have a backlog. We do. We need to reduce that backlog.
Okay, Secretary Bramble, I and my constituents don't live in other states. So we live in Maryland.
Right.
So if people say, if there's something, if my front yard needs to be, the grass needs to be cut, I don't say, well, my neighbor has a couch in the front yard. Like that doesn't make me look better. And certainly as an elected official, I have a higher standard.
Now, I appreciate that.
So please, so what we're interested very specifically, do you know how many they are? And do you have a plan to clear the backlog?
Yes, we do.
And can you share that with us?
Yes, we will.
Thank
And we
you.
will, and we also, I want to assure members of the committee that we are putting a priority on those that are the most significant or could be the most impactful for overburdened or underserved communities.
Right.
We do have a plan for that. We'll share that with the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. So, and then just as a part of that, I just want to clarify what we're expecting, Chairman. We want to know how long it will take, right? And then how many more permit, writers, getting to your staffing issue, how many permit writers do you need to make sure it doesn't happen again, so that going forward, that we're not coming back to this. And just to your point about, I'm glad that you are, doing some top priorities, you're prioritizing certain backlog permits. But I want to be very clear to make sure, so you compared yourself to an umpire, right? So if an umpire is always calling fouls on certain players or on certain teams, you begin to feel that the umpire is sort of biased. So while I'm happy, and I live in Baltimore City, and I'm happy you're going to look at the backwater waste treatment facility, but we are expecting that a high priority. Are you also prioritizing those permits that were raised specifically in this hearing? Is that part of your prioritization?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and so when are you working on how many? Could you tell us, besides Baltimore City, what others are your priorities? And that'll be my last question.
Right now, my priority in Baltimore City is on the stormwater permit, the MS4 permit, but the real priority is filing the lawsuit, the notices of intervention in the federal lawsuit, and filing our own state lawsuit, which we're working with the Attorney General on, and that should be happening very, very soon.
So what other, and I guess I didn't get the answer. So you said the word Baltimore City again. So
yes.
What other parts in the state are you focused on to make sure that you're keeping the air clean and the water safe and the groundwater safe? We
have a lot of enforcement actions. I don't want to announce prematurely some of the enforcement actions, but we're looking at, there are a lot of septic systems. There are some wastewater systems at Motel. We are in litigation with cities and counties around the state. I just, because of the importance to the Chesapeake Bay and the local quality of life in Baltimore City, and the investments, almost $1 billion made by the state and the federal government too, and the Back River and the Patapsco wastewater treatment plants at Baltimore City. When we discovered, and we absolutely been partnering with Blue Water Baltimore, when we discovered the significant effluent violations and failure to report and do record keeping and control fats, oils, and greases, I've made it a priority, and I know it's going to be a lawsuit that we're going to be filing against the city. We want to help them solve the problem, and we want to hold their feet to the fire because it matters a lot. And that's also why I wrote to the mayor suggesting that ARPA rescue plan dollars should be focused on helping to optimize the workforce at Back River and Patapsco, because they've been hit by COVID, they've been hit by whatever else, but they haven't been meeting the terms of the MDE permits.
Well, Secretary, I hope that you also care about the 25,000 gallons of untreated sewage in St. George's Creek in St. Mary's County that's contracting foodborne illnesses.
We have,
but that's, we don't need to, but again, what I'm saying to my committee and all those who are listening is that to continue to just lay out Baltimore City or just one or two, when there are hundreds of cases that are affecting all Marylanders. And that's what we want you to focus on.
We required St. Mary's and their wastewater utility to immediately fix the problem that has led to the sewage spills that contaminated the oysters. You're right. We do commit to continue focusing on other areas throughout the state that need enforcement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go to Senator Lamb, followed by Senator Patterson, followed by Senator Hester, and then we'll be close to wrapping it up. Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's good to see you again. MDE is a public health agency, just like EPA is. I find it pretty damning, some of the conclusions that were drawn out of the Cadmus report that says that Maryland's drinking water program is significantly understaffed and underfunded. And ultimately, MDE's ability to protect public health is compromised, that the situation is so acute that the state risks losing primary enforcement responsibility over the regulation of its own drinking water systems and may be forced to cede primary responsibility to the federal government. It seems like a huge acknowledgement that we can't carry on our own responsibilities and may have to look to the feds to help us out. This is an embarrassment for the state. And, with all due respect, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate that you're sounding contrite about this situation, I think it's a public embarrassment that the department under your leadership has been asleep at the wheel. It's like the department is barreling down the highway at full speed when you know that you have 4 flat tires. The report actually says that the state would not know if a Flint-style water crisis were just over the horizon. And that's actually from the Attorney General's letter. So I understand you're not accepting the status quo here, but why and how did we get to this point of such understaffing under your leadership? And the second half of that is, are there other areas within the department that are understaffed similarly? And do we need to employ a consultant to disclose those to us?
Thank you, Senator. I don't view the glass as half empty or so gloom and doom. What I recognize is, in the spirit of continuous improvement and reaching out to other organizations like Cadmus, and as we and EPA did, there are areas of it that need attention. And in the water supply program, I would say it's a combination of retirements of staff, you can call it the silver tsunami or whatever, that program in particular, we've seen some retirements, and also—
But these should not have been a surprise, right?
That is not a surprise. So this is not an excuse. It's just the reality is that particularly during COVID, there were a lot of early retirements as well. And also the changing dynamics of the private sector weighing in to do many of the inspections means we've lost some employees. So this is an area of continuous vigilance. And I want to underscore, Senator, that we put a priority on protecting public health and the environment, and the drinking water program is one. That's why we, with EPA, asked for this Cadmus report, and why we are moving forward and making progress in filling vacancies.
But it seemed like had the department been actually filling these out, then the EPA would not have needed to ask for the Cadmus report and a consultant to come in to tell you essentially what it seems like you already were aware. Your understaffing seems to be a common theme here, Mr. Secretary, whether it's inspecting our water treatment plants or chicken farms on the Eastern Shore to make sure that effluent is not leaching into the bay. There just doesn't seem to be adequate staffing here in the department. And you can only ask state employees to do so much with less.
Right. They do a lot.
Something's got to give or something breaks.
They're outstanding, and we're very proud. I'm particularly very proud of the staff. It's not an agency to work in if you want to be popular, but it is a very important one. And your point about continued adequate staffing is valid, and we're committed to that, and we're getting the resources, we're aligning those resources, and we will continue to do everything in our power to avoid risk to public health, which is why we've taken significant steps over the last 2 years to really accelerate our efforts on emerging contaminants, which I know you know all about, the PFAS contaminants. It's a very important one, and we're making real progress on that front to test and have the science and look at the different strategies, not just in the water program, but in the land and materials program and even the air program.
Okay.
And I appreciate that commitment, but will you commit to fill the 30 or more employees necessary in the water supply program so that inspections are taking place every year as opposed to every 5 years before your term is up?
Yeah, I'm committed to filling the vacancies, getting to our goal of 102 and making sure that happens as soon as possible. And I feel like we're going to deliver on that. And the good news, again, is we're working closely with the EPA. we're going to make real progress on it, and I appreciate the committee's attention to it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Patterson, please, followed by Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all the presenters who shared some critical information with us this afternoon. I tell you, I am really frightened behind this report. And I hope we don't leave here today with a sense of just passing the buck. So I'd just like to ask the Secretary, do you propose any type of disciplinary action as a result of some members not carrying out their duty responsibilities?
No, what I propose to do is what any responsible agency head should be doing, and that is have performance evaluations of employees and supervisors and making sure that underperformers are reassigned to areas and that we have the top performers in key priority areas like source water protection.
We heard a lot about vacancies this afternoon. So what happened, if you're 50% short of staff members, what happened to salary lap monies? Do those monies go back into your budget for other uses, or what happened to those dollars?
Let me get back to you on that, Senator, is how the monies are used. What we are always held to accountability on how the funds are managed and used. And we generally, when we don't have funds for positions, those go back to either other special funds or back to the general fund.
And I guess lastly, will you commit today that you will develop a detailed analytical type of recruitment plan to ensure that you find the quality of people that you need to have at your agency? I mean, I'm talking about in terms of
yes, sir,
strategy for recruitment. Where do you?
I do, and the reason I was invited to join Administrator Regan at the Ashburton Water Treatment Plant months ago with the Senators Cardin and Van Hollen was to underscore the importance of apprenticeship programs to deal with the quote unquote graying of the workforce in the water sector and to recruit new talent and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and hiring the future water leaders for the state. So I absolutely commit to that.
Okay, I certainly would be interested in seeing that, perhaps my other colleagues as well. But, an agency I used to work with a long time ago, federal agency, they used to always tell us, well, if you can't find them, I guess you have to come up with a plan in terms of how you grow them. But anyway,
thank you
very much.
Thank you.
And finally, Senator Fry Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Mr. Secretary. My question, we focused a lot on the public drinking water supply. My question is about the drinking water that is in private wells. My understanding is that there's about 2 million Marylanders who drink from private wells. And I was pleased to get a report from your office that you finished in December on the safety of our groundwater. But I was also, reading through the very end and the recommendations. And in the report, it says, in Maryland, there are no state regulations that require individual domestic well owners to maintain their well or test their drinking water unless the property is a rental property. And many contaminants cannot be seen, smelled, or tasted, but are naturally present or have been anthropogenically introduced. And then there's some recommendations that follow this, including that we should test these wells at the time of property transfer, and also coordinate improvements in terms of data sharing between MDH and MDE. And so my question is, do you think, I've actually got a couple questions. Do you think that testing these wells at property transfer is enough? What do you specifically need in terms of IT investment for this data sharing between MDH and MDE? And then tangentially related is when you're building a house and you've got like two houses on wells next to each other, you could bring in soil from someplace, on the new house. And my question is that soil tested or monitored or tracked at all by MDE? Because it could, if it was contaminated, it could hurt the drinking water of the person on the well downstream, if you will. And so I was wondering if you could touch on that also.
I so much appreciate your interest in the quality of our state's drinking water supplies, particularly the private wells, since those are not regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act at the federal level. We're at the state level in that sense. So I'm going to commit to get back to you on those specific, the fairly technical but important, and the coordination with Maryland Department of Health on the well testing and the quality of drinking water supplies for where private wells are involved. I would say that we just in working with Maryland Department of Transportation just issued a press release on the importance of significantly reducing the use of road salts the winter or whenever, because road salts, unlike brine or other best management practices, can present a real risk not only to streams and wildlife, but to public health. Private wells, the chemical road salts. So our state's cut in half the amount of road salts that's been used over the last 5 years, thanks to the State Highway Administration and MDE in part, and local leadership to, it's just another example of potential risks of contamination to private wells. So Senator, let me get back to you on that, please, for more detail and accuracy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And just the final part was about those potentially contaminated soils and whether where MDE has any role in monitoring the soils that are used in construction.
The soils that are used in construction of private wells?
Well, I mean, I guess it could be in commercial too, but no, but when you truck in soil, are those soils in any ways tested before they are used in building? And obviously,
I don't know the answer to that. I've got staff who can get the answer to it, and we'll follow up with you hopefully before the end of this week.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. In closing, Secretary Grumbles, two final questions, or one question and a comment. The water pollution controls, you've talked about the administratively continued permits that you have not been able to reanalyze, revet permits, that they're up to date and you've had to extend them, in some cases 5, 10, 15 years. I assume you have not been able to resubmit full permits because of a shortage of staff. So my question to you is, over the last 6 or 7 years, have you made requests to Governor Hogan in the pre-budget preparation, asking for more positions for your department? And has he simply said no, or did you not ask for those additional positions?
Just to clarify, when a permit, and we have thousands, tens of thousands of permits that we issue, when they expire, they reach the end of their permit term, it's by operational law that they administratively continue as long as notice has been provided to us that notice has been provided that their duration is coming to an end. In terms of our strategy, which is not unlike other states, what matters most is what's happening in Maryland. Our strategy has been to identify those administratively continued permits that present the greatest risks. We are continuing to do that and focus particularly on those where there's significant non-compliance. That's where it's both modernizing the permit, but even more taking enforcement action. Your question was about have I made requests to the governor? What I make requests every year to the Department of Budget and Management, the governor's top budget team, is to make sure that our department has sufficient resources to carry out our mission. We always we get what we ask for. And the legislature also is very supportive of providing us resources. From time to time, those needs change. So I would say on the vacancies front in water supply, that's an area where the governor's team has been making clear to us, yeah, we need to fill those vacancies. Let's do it.
Right. I didn't ask about vacancies, Mr. Secretary.
Oh.
I asked simply whether you have asked for additional inspectors so we don't have such a big backlog, whether you asked for them for additional resources and the governor approved it or didn't approve it. You said you asked for the necessary resources and the governor has fulfilled that. So given that we have we have 196 zombie permits when it comes to water pollution controls, it would have seemed to me that you would have requested additional inspectors and then the governor either would have approved it or not. But I think I heard somewhere in your answer, you said the resources that you thought were appropriate and needed were filled. So then I can only assume you did not request additional pins for additional inspectors to reduce the backlog.
I was referring to our commitment to filling the needs, the problem that's been identified in the water supply program. With respect to any other time over the past years, what requests have been for inspectors, I need to check, Mr. Chairman, with staff on the accuracy of that. We always emphasize the importance of compliance and enforcement. So I need to get back to you on that.
Well, I think our committee would love to have your pre-budget request to DBM when the budgets were being developed, and we would like in writing or electronic your requests, and we would like to review whether you did ask for additional inspectors. So thank you for that. Let me close with this, ladies and gentlemen. Recently I've been reading House of Pain about the Oxycontin and Sackler family. It's a bestseller. And I've also been watching Dopesick, for those of you who watch streaming. And one of the issues that has come out consistently is that it wasn't an issue of the FDA controlling big pharma, but big pharma controlling the FDA, which led to the Oxycontin outrageous epidemic in this country. And I just think there's a concern out there, which we would love to be able to alleviate, that the Department of the Environment is protecting the public and controlling the sector that they're supposed to protect, rather than that sector directing them. So we thank you. We think we found this illuminating. This brings this aspect of our afternoon hearings to a close. I would remind the committee that you have to go to a different link to go to bill hearings for this afternoon. We have 4 bills. It shouldn't take long. I want to thank the committee. I want to thank the secretary. I want to thank the attorney general. I want to thank Mr. Schaefer for enlightening us and be willing to come here and in some cases take responsibility for some ill-conceived action. So with that,